So let's talk about why study Tantra. I think it's probably the best question to ask out of the gate. You have a hatha practice that's meaningful to you, that's powerful, and that until now has been perfect. So why should we go into this? Well, there's a few things I want to offer as a way to begin to look into the why and the value of studying Tantra, and more importantly, even practicing it. So it begins really with, looking at the fact that if you've been around yoga for a while, it's not long before you start collecting some terminology or some concepts, and beyond just asana. So there's pranayama, the work with the breath, and there's mantra, for example. Then we hear things even like kundalini and the chakras and kundalini yoga, as it were, bandhas and mudras and even visualization. Perhaps you've heard about Kriya meditation. So there are all of these different types of methodologies, some things perhaps that we've already begun to include in our practice. And so the question is, really it's not really a question, really the idea here is that Tantra is the thread that weaves all of these teachings together in a singular system. And so the value of starting to study Tantra is when we begin to utilize a kind of singular orientation. In other words, a unique context. Tantra has both a philosophical context and then this vast array of methodologies to allow us to embody that philosophy. When we start drawing upon one single system to practice those various techniques, the techniques become increasingly synergistic. They become increasingly more powerful. And in fact, it was the tantras or the tantric techniques or the tantric wisdom that was really the birthplace or the flowering of asana, of hatha yoga. So when we understand the larger context from which asana has come from, we can begin to practice it in a way that has further and more expanded reach. That's the possibility of it. So one of the things I describe is that really Tantra is the full flowering of yoga. And it allows us to really begin to collect the knowledge so that we can weave all the unique threads, all of these unique techniques into a single system. And most importantly, the reach of it when we start to use it in a more, let's call it alchemical way, it's just that much more profound. So this becomes then a systematic and comprehensive approach to experience the fullest potential of our yoga practice. Probably the central theme, although it's hard to nail it down to one idea of what Tantra is, but one of the key ideas is auspiciousness. You may or may not know, but the word Shiva, who was actually the first yogi, his actual name, that name, Shiva, means auspicious. And what it essentially, how I relate this idea into these teachings is the idea that really we practice yoga for a simple reason. We practice yoga to thrive. We practice yoga to be happy more and be unhappy less. The idea is we want to generate success. We want to generate happiness. And if we understand the full flowering of yoga, the full power, the full capacity of yoga, then lo and behold, our life becomes more auspicious. And we'll talk about how we even begin to judge whether that's happening or not. There are paradigms to see to what extent our yoga is working in our life. Tantra weaves, it's a kind of a weaving, and in just a moment, next video, I'll actually describe the definitions in some detail. But one of the things that it does is it weaves together, it threads together the inner and the outer world. Both the inner world of the mind, the spirit, our psyche, and the outer world of our daily living and what we do for a living, for example, how we relate to friends and family. And Tantra really has something to contribute to every aspect of life, both the inner and the outer world. We can say that its reach is limitless and its potency is limitless as well. As you were starting to move into Tantra, I'm sure that some students who are watching these videos have had some encounters with Tantra. When you start looking into the legitimate and the traditional uses of Tantric methodology, what you see is that it affects everything from the inner world, where we begin to break down or to maximize our psychological potential, how we perceive the world, how we perceive ourselves. And then if we look beyond those more yogic techniques, many of the techniques that we'll work with together, a lot of these things, you actually see that tantrics have this amazing reach into the outer world. I have a story, and it takes a little bit too much time to tell, but I'll tell you that literally I've met tantrics who can affect the population of bees, for example, in the environment. They can affect things like weather and even the atmosphere in a home, for example. So there's a lot of external uses for tantric practices, and we'll cover some of those. And then one little piece of tantra that we'll study together in some detail is something called Shwara Yoga. And this is working with the fluctuations in the flow of our neurology, the breath, and even the planets, and the cycles of the moon. So in short, this is a deeply practical science and a profoundly mysterious science. I'm thrilled to be able to kind of break down what I think are the essential things you need to know in order to practice and teach yoga in such a way that you can really change and improve people's lives. Because that's what this is all about, to help people expand their worldview of what is possible. Lastly, as I began to say, and as I've already talked about, I've been schooled by teachers, and in this context, master tantric teachers. So the Tantra that I will be teaching will be rooted in tradition. Let's say in the last 10 years or so since Tantra has gotten popularized, as I looked out and I saw the landscape, there was something I began to I found a kind of synonymous term with Tantra, which is I made it up. In other words, it's almost as though people want to be creative and they grab a little bit of this and they grab a little bit of that. You throw in a little massage oil, and you throw in some good music, and you throw in this, and it suddenly becomes tantric practice. Well, again, nothing can be further from the truth. And unfortunately, it's almost such a devaluation of the potential that it has to reach and improve our lives that we won't spend a lot of time with it. In fact, we'll spend none. Okay, so those are the approaches that we're not going to study. We are going to study those that reach deeply into the heart of the practice and that can reach deeply into your own soul. And as we move with that understanding and we move into the depth of this wisdom, I look forward to taking this journey with you.